The sound of gravel crunching under tires broke the peaceful morning silence at Windsor Castle. Security guards, expecting the usual convoy of black Range Rovers with tinted windows, instead watched in amazement as a modest silver Audi pulled up to the main entrance. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about royal moments of the year. Behind the wheel sat Princess Catherine, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a casual blazer. No royal protocol, no security detail following behind. No advance notice to the castle staff. Just a future queen, driving herself to what would become an unforgettable reception that changed how the world saw the British royal family forever. This is the story of how one spontaneous decision by the Princess of Wales created headlines around the globe, warmed millions of hearts, and reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when royalty chooses to be refreshingly, beautifully human. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday at Adelaide Cottage. Princess Catherine woke up at 6:30, as she always did, to the gentle sound of birds singing outside her bedroom window. The autumn sun was just beginning to peek through the curtains, casting a warm golden glow across the cozy room she shared with Prince William. She could hear the distant sounds of their children getting ready for school downstairs, their voices mixing with the cheerful chatter of their nanny, Maria. Catherine stretched and smiled, feeling unusually energetic despite the busy week ahead. She had been looking forward to today's reception at Windsor Castle for weeks. It was a special event honoring local community heroes, ordinary people who had done extraordinary things for their neighbors during the past year. The guest list included teachers who had gone above and beyond, healthcare workers who had shown exceptional dedication, volunteers who had started food banks, and young people who had organized charity drives. These were exactly the kind of people Catherine loved meeting, the ones who reminded her why her royal duties felt so meaningful. As she made her way to the kitchen, still in her pajamas and fluffy slippers, Catherine found William already dressed in his suit, gulping down coffee while checking his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, that familiar warm smile that had captured her heart all those years ago at university. "Morning, darling," he said, reaching out to pull her close for a quick kiss. "Ready for your big day at Windsor?" "More than ready," Catherine replied, pouring herself a cup of tea from the pot Maria had prepared. "I've been reading through all the stories about today's guests. There's a 92-year-old woman named Dorothy who started teaching children to read during lockdown, and a teenager called James who organized food deliveries for elderly residents in his tower block. I can't wait to hear their stories properly." William grinned. "You always get so excited about meeting people. It's one of my favorite things about you." Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of running feet on the stairs. Prince George appeared first, his school uniform slightly askew, followed by Princess Charlotte, who was trying to tie her hair ribbon while walking, and little Prince Louis, who bounded into the kitchen with his usual morning enthusiasm. "Mummy!" "Daddy!" Louis called out, throwing himself into Catherine's arms. "Can we come to the castle with you today?" Catherine laughed and ruffled his hair. "Not today, sweetheart. You have school, and Mummy has important work to do. But maybe next weekend we can all go to Windsor together for a nice walk." After helping the children with breakfast and seeing them off to school, Catherine went upstairs to get ready. She had chosen her outfit carefully the night before. An elegant navy dress by one of her favorite British designers, paired with her grandmother's pearl earrings and a simple gold bracelet. The look was polished but not too formal, perfect for an event celebrating everyday heroes. As she was putting the finishing touches on her makeup, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from her private secretary, Hannah. "Car will be ready in 30 minutes. Driver is James today, and your PPO team is already en route to Windsor to secure the venue." Catherine paused, looking at herself in the mirror. Something about the message didn't sit right with her. Here she was, getting ready to meet people who had done incredible things with no fanfare, no special recognition, just out of the goodness of their hearts. Meanwhile, she would arrive in a convoy of expensive cars with a full security detail, creating a barrier between herself and the very people she wanted to connect with. She thought about Dorothy, the elderly reading teacher, and how nervous she might feel meeting a princess. She thought about young James, who had probably never seen anything like a royal motorcade in his working-class neighborhood. Would all the formality and security make them feel uncomfortable? Would it create distance when she wanted to build connection? An idea began to form in Catherine's mind. It was spontaneous, maybe a little crazy, but it felt absolutely right. She picked up her phone and dialed Hannah's number. "Hannah, it's Catherine. I've had a change of plans. Your Royal Highness, is everything all right? Do you need to reschedule the reception?" "No, nothing like that. I want to drive myself to Windsor today. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. Drive yourself? Yes, in my own car. No motorcade, no fuss. Just me, driving to Windsor like any normal person would. Catherine could practically hear Hannah's mind racing. Ma'am, with respect, the security protocols can be adjusted for once. Catherine said firmly but kindly. Hannah, these are people who catch buses and walk to work every day. I want to meet them as naturally as possible. All that formality creates barriers I don't want today. But Your Royal Highness, this would need approval from, then get the approvals. I know it's unusual, but it's not dangerous. It's a 20-minute drive on roads I've traveled hundreds of times. My protection officers can follow at a discreet distance if they must, but I'm driving myself today. After 20 minutes of back-and-forth phone calls between Hannah, the security team, and various palace officials, Catherine got the reluctant green light for her plan. The compromise was that 2 protection officers would follow in an unmarked car, staying far enough back to give her the independence she wanted, but close enough to respond if needed. William, who had overheard parts of the conversation, shook his head with an amused smile. You know this is going to cause quite a stir, don't you? Good, Catherine replied, grabbing her car keys from the kitchen counter. Sometimes a little stir is exactly what's needed. She walked out to the garage where her silver Audi sat waiting. It was nothing fancy, just a reliable family car that she used for school runs and casual trips around Norfolk. As she adjusted her mirrors and put on her seatbelt, Catherine felt a flutter of excitement. When was the last time she'd driven somewhere alone for a royal engagement? She couldn't remember. The drive to Windsor was beautiful. The autumn leaves were at their peak, painting the countryside in brilliant shades of gold and red. Catherine rolled down the window slightly, letting the fresh air flow through the car. She passed cyclists and dog walkers, families in gardens raking leaves, teenagers waiting at bus stops. Normal life happening all around her, and for once, she felt like a natural part of it rather than someone passing through in a bubble of formality. As she drove, Catherine thought about her role and how she wanted to use it. Being a princess was an incredible privilege, but sometimes the very things that marked her status, the cars and security and protocol, created distance from the people she most wanted to serve. Today felt like a small but important step toward changing that. Her phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was William. Just checking in. How's the rebel princess doing on her solo adventure? Catherine laughed. Feeling wonderfully normal, actually. I just passed a family having a picnic in a field. The children waved at me, but just because I waved first, not because they recognized me. It was lovely. Well, enjoy it while it lasts. Something tells me this little stunt of yours is going to make quite a few headlines. Let them write headlines. If it helps people see that we're not so different from them, that's worth it. As Catherine approached Windsor Castle, she could see the familiar towers rising in the distance. Soon she would be back in her official role. But this drive had reminded her of something important. The best parts of being royal weren't about the ceremony and tradition, they were about the connections, the conversations, the chance to shine a light on good people doing good things. She pulled up to the castle gates, where the security guard did a double take when he saw her behind the wheel. After checking her identification with barely concealed amusement, he waved her through. Have a lovely day, Your Royal Highness. Quite a nice surprise to see you driving yourself. Thank you, Catherine replied with a smile. I hope it's the first of many surprises. As she parked the car and walked toward the castle entrance, Catherine felt energized and ready. Today was going to be special. She could feel it. She had no idea that her simple decision to drive herself would soon become the talk of the nation, but she was about to find out just how powerful authenticity could be. Margaret Thornbury had been working at Windsor Castle for 37 years. She had seen it all: state visits, royal weddings, family celebrations, and formal receptions beyond counting. As the head of guest services, she prided herself on being prepared for anything. Royal events ran like clockwork under her careful supervision. Every detail planned weeks in advance, every possible scenario accounted for. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of Princess Catherine walking up the castle steps at exactly 10:15, carrying her own handbag and car keys with no entourage in sight. Margaret stood at the main entrance, clipboard in hand, watching through the tall windows as a silver car pulled into the courtyard. She was expecting to see the familiar convoy of black vehicles that always announced a royal arrival. Instead, she watched in growing amazement as the Princess of Wales stepped out of what looked like a perfectly ordinary family car, locked it with a small beep, and walked toward the castle as if she were arriving for a coffee date with friends. Good morning, Margaret, Catherine said warmly as she approached the entrance. Lovely day for the reception, isn't it? Margaret, usually unflappable even in the presence of royalty, found herself momentarily speechless. Your Royal Highness, she managed, executing a small curtsy. We weren't expecting, that is, your usual, the motorcade? Catherine laughed, a genuinely delighted sound that echoed off the stone walls. I decided to give them the morning off. I hope that's all right. Of course, ma'am, Margaret replied, though her mind was already racing through the implications. Security protocols, parking arrangements, staff schedules, all perfectly planned around the usual royal arrival procedure. But as she looked at Catherine's relaxed, happy expression, Margaret found herself smiling too. Word spread quickly through the castle staff. In the kitchens, Chef Robert paused in his preparation of elegant canapes when his sous chef whispered the news. In the great hall, the florists arranging the final touches on their displays looked up in surprise. Even the security team, usually models of professional discretion, exchanged glances of amazement. Sarah Chen, a junior staff member responsible for greeting guests, was setting up the registration table when Margaret approached her. Sarah, there's been a slight change to this morning's proceedings, Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral but her eyes twinkling with suppressed excitement. Her Royal Highness has arrived rather more informally than usual. I think today might be a bit different from our typical royal receptions. Catherine, meanwhile, was being given her usual pre-event briefing by Hannah, who had arrived earlier with the advance team. They stood in the blue drawing room, surrounded by priceless paintings and centuries of royal history. But Catherine seemed more interested in looking out the windows at the guests beginning to arrive in the courtyard below. The guest list is final at 42 individuals, Hannah was saying, consulting her notes. We have the usual receiving line arranged, followed by the presentation ceremony, then refreshments in the green drawing room. Each guest will have approximately 3 minutes for individual conversation, and we've prepared briefing cards with key talking points for each person. Catherine nodded absently, watching as a woman in her 90s was helped from a taxi by a young man who must be her grandson. This had to be Dorothy, the reading teacher she had been so eager to meet. Hannah, she said suddenly, what if we change things up a bit today? Her private secretary looked up from her notes with the expression of someone who had already handled enough surprises for one morning. In what way, ma'am? Well, look at them. Catherine gestured toward the window. They're arriving just like I did, in normal cars and taxis, probably feeling a bit nervous about coming to Windsor Castle. Why make them stand in a formal line waiting to meet me for exactly 3 minutes each? Why not just mingle? Mingle. Hannah repeated the word, as if she had never heard it before. Yes, walk around, have conversations, let things happen naturally. These people have incredible stories. I want to hear them properly, not just exchange pleasantries for 3 minutes while someone times us with a stopwatch. Hannah glanced at her clipboard, then at Catherine's determined expression, and sighed. Ma'am, the protocol for royal receptions has been established for decades, I know, but these people aren't diplomats or politicians. They're the lady who lives next door, the teacher who stayed late to help struggling students, the teenager who organized his entire neighborhood to help during the pandemic. They deserve something more personal than protocol. Before Hannah could respond, there was a gentle knock on the drawing room door. Margaret entered with a warm smile. Your Royal Highness, our guests have arrived and are gathering in the Great Hall. They seem quite excited to meet you. Wonderful, Catherine said, then paused. Margaret, in your experience, what makes people feel most comfortable when they visit the castle? Margaret considered the question seriously. Honestly, ma'am, the times I've seen guests truly light up are when they forget where they are and just focus on having a genuine conversation. When the formality melts away and they remember that they're talking to a person, not just a title. Catherine smiled. Exactly what I was thinking. Would it be possible to arrange things a bit more casually today, instead of a receiving line? Could we just invite everyone into the Great Hall and let conversations happen naturally? Margaret's eyes widened slightly, but her smile grew broader. It would be my pleasure, ma'am. Quite refreshing, actually. 20 minutes later, Catherine entered the Great Hall to find 42 people scattered throughout the magnificent space, some admiring the paintings, others gazing up at the vaulted ceiling, all of them looking slightly overwhelmed by their surroundings. She took a deep breath and walked directly to the nearest group, a family clustered together near one of the tall windows. Hello, she said simply, extending her hand to a woman about her own age. I'm Catherine. You must be here for the Community Heroes reception? The woman's face broke into a surprised smile. Yes, I'm Jennifer Mills. I can't believe I'm actually here. This place is incredible. It is rather special, Catherine agreed, looking around as if seeing the Great Hall for the first time herself. But more importantly, I understand you're pretty incredible too. I read that you started a community garden that now feeds over 100 families.
Jennifer blushed.
It wasn't just me. The whole neighborhood got involved. We had this empty lot that was just collecting rubbish, and I thought, why not grow something beautiful there instead? As they talked, other guests began to notice what was happening. Instead of waiting to be formally presented to the princess, they were watching her have a real conversation with one of them. The atmosphere in the room began to shift from nervous anticipation to warm curiosity. Catherine spent 20 minutes with Jennifer's family, hearing about the community garden, the challenges they had faced getting permission from the local council, and the joy of watching children learn where their food comes from. When she moved on to the next group, Jennifer was glowing with happiness. "She's not at all what I expected," Jennifer whispered to her husband. "She's just so normal." Next, Catherine approached Dorothy, the elderly reading teacher, who was sitting on one of the antique chairs with her grandson standing protectively beside her. Dorothy's eyes were bright with intelligence despite her age, and she was clearly taking in every detail of her surroundings. "You must be Dorothy," Catherine said, sitting down in the chair next to her. "I've been looking forward to meeting you all week. A friend of mine mentioned that you've been teaching children to read for over 70 years. Dorothy's face lit up. 73 years next month, actually. Started when I was 19, fresh out of college and convinced I could change the world, one book at a time. And did you? Change the world, I mean? Well, I certainly changed a few small corners of it, Dorothy chuckled. When the schools closed during the pandemic, I couldn't bear the thought of children falling behind. So I set up in my front garden with a little blackboard and invited neighborhood children to come learn. Rain or shine, we were out there every morning. That's remarkable, Catherine said, and meant it. What kept you going when things got difficult? The children, of course, Dorothy replied without hesitation. Have you ever seen a child's face when they read their first complete sentence? When the letters suddenly make sense and become words, and words become stories? It's magic. Pure and simple. I may be 92, but I'm not ready to stop making magic yet. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. This was exactly why she loved these events, these moments when she met people who reminded her what really mattered in life. Across the room, other conversations were blossoming. James, the teenager who had organized food deliveries, was enthusiastically explaining his distribution system to a group that had gathered around him. A nurse named Patricia was showing photos of the mobile clinic she had helped establish in rural areas. A retired builder called Frank was describing the playground he had constructed single-handedly for a school that couldn't afford proper equipment. The formal atmosphere of a royal reception had transformed into something that felt more like a neighborhood gathering, with Catherine moving naturally from group to group, sitting on floors when needed, laughing at stories, asking thoughtful questions, and genuinely connecting with each person she met. Margaret watched from the doorway, marveling at the change in atmosphere. In all her years at the castle, she had never seen guests so relaxed, so open, so genuinely happy to be there. The princess had somehow managed to make Windsor Castle feel like someone's living room. Hannah, meanwhile, was frantically rewriting her schedule notes and trying to calculate how long each conversation was taking. But even she couldn't help smiling as she watched Catherine sitting cross-legged on the floor, listening intently as a group of young environmentalists explained their river cleanup project. By the time lunch was announced, the guests felt like old friends. They moved together toward the green drawing room, chattering excitedly about their conversations with the princess, comparing stories, exchanging contact information. The formal barriers that usually defined royal events had simply melted away, and at the center of it all was Catherine, looking more energized and happy than the castle staff had seen her in years. Her decision to drive herself had been just the beginning. By choosing to meet her guests as equals rather than subjects, she had created something magical, something that would be talked about long after the formal photographs were forgotten. As they moved toward lunch, Margaret caught Hannah's eye and smiled. Well, she whispered, I think we can officially say this wasn't your typical royal reception. Hannah shook her head in wonder. Something tells me Her Royal Highness is just getting started. The green drawing room at Windsor Castle had hosted countless formal luncheons over the centuries, but none quite like this one. As guests settled around tables that had been arranged more like a family gathering than a state function, Catherine found herself seated between Dorothy, the elderly reading teacher, and Marcus, a former gang member who now ran a youth mentoring program in East London. Catherine had requested this seating arrangement herself, abandoning the usual protocol of placing the guest of honor at a head table surrounded by officials. Instead, she wanted to continue the conversations that had begun so naturally in the Great Hall. "I have to admit," Marcus was saying as they started their first course, "when I got the invitation to this, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Me, eating lunch at Windsor Castle? 6 months ago, I was lucky if I could afford proper meals." Dorothy leaned forward with interest. "What changed for you, dear?" Marcus looked surprised to be addressed directly by the elderly woman, but Catherine could see him relaxing as he recognized the genuine curiosity in Dorothy's eyes. "A kid in my neighborhood, actually," Marcus said. 14 years old, reminded me a lot of myself at that age. Angry, getting into trouble, heading down the same path I went down. I couldn't just watch it happen again. Catherine set down her fork, fully focused on Marcus's story. "What did you do?" "Started simple. Offered to help him with homework. Turned out he couldn't read properly, was too embarrassed to tell anyone." "Sound familiar?" Marcus glanced at Dorothy with a small smile. Dorothy's eyes sparkled. "Oh, very familiar indeed. What happened next?" "Well, I'm not exactly qualified to teach reading, but I figured I could at least try. Before I knew it, word had spread, and I had half a dozen kids showing up at my flat every evening. Then it was a dozen. Now we've got a proper center with volunteers and everything." "That's extraordinary," Catherine said. "How many young people are you helping now?" "About 40 kids regularly, ranging from 8 to 18. We do homework, help job training, conflict resolution. But it all started with one kid who couldn't read and was too proud to ask for help." Dorothy reached over and patted Marcus's hand. "Do you know what I think?" "I think that young man was lucky to meet someone who saw himself in that child's situation. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who've walked the same difficult path." Marcus looked genuinely moved. "I never thought about it like that." Catherine watched this exchange with growing fascination. Here were two people from completely different backgrounds and generations, finding common ground in their shared commitment to helping children learn. It was exactly the kind of connection she had hoped for when she decided to abandon the formal protocol. At the table behind them, equally meaningful conversations were unfolding. James, the teenager who had organized food deliveries, was deep in discussion with Patricia, the mobile clinic nurse, about reaching isolated communities. Their animated conversation had drawn in several other guests, creating an impromptu brainstorming session about community outreach strategies. "The thing is," James was explaining, "people in tower blocks don't always know what resources are available to them. They might need help, but not know where to ask for it." Patricia nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly the same challenge we face in rural areas. People are proud, they don't want to admit they're struggling, but they're often dealing with real hardship."
What if there was a way to connect all these different programs? Asked Sarah, a social worker who had established a mental health support network.
"James reaches urban families. Patricia covers rural areas. I work with people dealing with depression and anxiety. We could share resources, refer people to each other." Catherine, overhearing this conversation, felt a thrill of excitement. This was better than anything she could have planned. These remarkable people were finding ways to help each other, help others. Her role was simply to provide a space where these connections could happen. She turned her attention back to her own table, where Dorothy was now telling Marcus about her front garden classroom during the pandemic. "The council tried to shut me down at first," Dorothy was saying with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Said I needed permits and insurance and all sorts of bureaucratic nonsense, so I invited them to come see what we were doing." "Did they come?" Marcus asked. "Oh yes, they came." Arrived just as little Emma Watson, she was 6 years old, finished reading her first complete storybook. The child was so excited she ran up to the council official and read the entire thing out loud to him, right there on the spot. Catherine laughed. "I can imagine that was pretty persuasive. Poor man didn't know what hit him." Dorothy grinned. Within a week, they had delivered proper outdoor furniture and a weather shelter. Sometimes you have to make it impossible for people to say no to the right thing. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You know what? I think you just gave me an idea for dealing with our landlord. He's been trying to shut down our youth center, says we're causing too much noise." "What kind of idea?" Catherine asked. "Well, what if we invited him to see exactly what kind of noise we're making? Show him the kids doing their homework, practicing job interviews, learning to resolve conflicts peacefully. Hard to complain about that kind of noise." Dorothy clapped her hands together. "Brilliant! Make it impossible for him to say no to the right thing." As lunch progressed, Catherine found herself moving between tables not as a royal guest making formal rounds, but as someone genuinely interested in the conversations happening around her. She sat with a group of environmental volunteers who had turned an abandoned lot into a community garden, learning about urban farming techniques and soil restoration. She listened to a former refugee who now helped newly arrived asylum seekers navigate the complex process of finding housing and employment. Each story revealed not just individual acts of heroism, but a web of community connections that stretched across London and beyond. People helping people, often with limited resources, but unlimited determination. Frank, the retired builder who had single-handedly constructed a school playground, was showing photos to anyone who would look. "Took me 8 weekends," he said proudly. "The head teacher said they'd been trying to raise funds for 5 years, but I figured why wait? I had the time, the skills, and the local builder's merchant gave me materials at cost when they heard what it was for." "That's incredible," said Jennifer, the woman who had started the community garden. "Did you know we had a similar problem with getting materials? The council kept promising funding that never came through." "What did you do?" Frank asked. "Started asking local businesses directly. Turns out a lot of shop owners were willing to help, they just didn't know the need was there. Sometimes you have to make the ask face to face." Catherine listened to these exchanges with growing amazement. These people were natural problem solvers, finding creative ways around bureaucracy and funding shortages. They saw needs in their communities and simply stepped up to meet them, often with remarkable ingenuity. As coffee was being served, Catherine stood up to address the group. But instead of the formal speech Hannah had prepared for her, she found herself speaking from the heart. "I have to tell you all something," she began, and the room gradually quieted. "When I woke up this morning, I thought I was going to a reception to honor community heroes. What I actually found was a masterclass in how to make the world better." She paused, looking around the room at faces that had become familiar over the course of the afternoon. "Each of you saw a problem and decided to be part of the solution. But what strikes me most is how you did it. You didn't wait for permission or funding or official approval. You just started helping, and then you kept going when it got difficult." Dorothy raised her hand slightly. "If I may, Your Royal Highness, I think the secret is that we didn't set out to be heroes. We just saw neighbors who needed help." "Exactly," said Marcus. "When you see a kid struggling to read, you don't think about being heroic. You just think about helping that kid. And when you see elderly neighbors who can't get to the shops," added James, "you don't consider yourself doing charity work. You're just being neighborly." Catherine nodded, feeling something crystallize in her mind. "So what you're telling me is that extraordinary things happen when ordinary people just choose to care about each other?" "I think that's it exactly," said Patricia, the mobile clinic nurse. "The extraordinary part isn't the caring. Everyone cares about their neighbors. The extraordinary part is deciding to do something about it." The room fell into a comfortable silence as people absorbed this insight. Catherine looked around at these remarkable individuals and realized she was experiencing something she had never felt at a royal event before. Instead of being the person with the title and platform who was supposed to inspire others, she was the one being inspired. "You know what?" she said finally. "I think you've taught me more today than I could ever teach you, but I hope this isn't the end of our conversation." Sarah, the social worker, spoke up. "Actually, we've been talking, and several of us would love to stay in touch. We're thinking about creating some kind of network, a way to share resources and support each other's work." "That's a brilliant idea," Catherine said immediately, "and I'd love to help make that happen if I can." As the official reception began to wind down, Catherine realized she had completely lost track of time. What was supposed to be a 2-hour formal event had stretched into nearly 4 hours of genuine connection and conversation. She had heard life stories that moved her to tears, learned about community solutions that inspired her, and watched strangers become collaborators and friends. Most importantly, she had remembered why she had wanted to take on royal duties in the first place. Not for the ceremonies and protocol, but for moments like these, when she could use her position to bring good people together and help amplify their important work. As guests began to gather their things and prepare to leave, Catherine knew this day would change her, but she had no idea how profoundly it was about to change everything else as well. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, Catherine found herself reluctant to end what had become the most meaningful royal engagement of her life. But logistics demanded attention, and guests needed to begin their journeys home. What happened next, however, would transform a lovely afternoon into a phenomenon that neither Catherine nor anyone else could have predicted. Jennifer Mills, the community garden organizer, was one of the first to prepare to leave. She approached Catherine with tears in her eyes. "Your Royal Highness, I can't thank you enough for today. But I have to ask, would it be terribly inappropriate if I took a photo? Not of you necessarily, but just to remember this room, this feeling?" Catherine smiled warmly. "Of course, please do."
But Jennifer, would you mind if I took a photo with you and some of the others?
I'd love to remember today too. What followed was completely unprecedented in royal protocol. Instead of the usual formal photographs taken by official photographers, Catherine found herself in the middle of an impromptu photo session using guests' personal phones. She posed with Dorothy and her grandson, with Marcus and his notebook full of ideas from the day's conversations, with James and his detailed plans for expanding his delivery network. "Wait," said Patricia, the mobile clinic nurse. "We should get a group photo, all of us together." "Brilliant idea," Catherine agreed immediately, much to Hannah's barely concealed alarm. They gathered in front of the magnificent fireplace in the green drawing room. 42 community heroes and one princess, all grinning like old friends at the end of a perfect dinner party. Frank, the retired builder, had the longest arms, so he became the unofficial photographer, holding up his phone to capture the moment. "Say community," he called out, and the resulting photo showed a group of people who looked genuinely happy to be together, with Catherine right in the middle, looking more relaxed and joyful than she had in any official royal photograph in years. But the real magic began when guests started leaving the castle and returning to their normal lives. Instead of keeping the experience to themselves, they began sharing their stories on social media, posting the photos they had taken, describing the conversations they had enjoyed. Jennifer was first, posting on her community garden's Facebook page while she waited for her train back to London. "Just spent the afternoon at Windsor Castle with Princess Catherine and the most amazing group of people I've ever met. The princess drove herself to the event and spent hours just talking with us like we were old friends. She sat on the floor, asked real questions, and genuinely cared about our answers." This is what royalty should be. Within an hour, Jennifer's post had been shared dozens of times. But it was just the beginning. Marcus posted the photo of himself with Catherine and Dorothy on his youth centre's Instagram account, "From the streets to Windsor Castle. Today I had lunch with a princess and a 92-year-old reading teacher who's been changing lives longer than I've been alive. Princess Catherine treated us all like family. She wanted to hear our stories, learn from our experiences, and help us connect with each other. This is how change happens." Dorothy's grandson helped her post on Twitter, though Dorothy insisted on writing the message herself. "At my age, you think you've seen everything. Today Princess Catherine proved me wrong. She drove herself to meet us, sat with us as equals, and reminded an old teacher that there's always more to learn. The monarchy has never felt more relevant or more human." James, the teenager, created a TikTok video showing clips from throughout the day, including the moment when Catherine sat cross-legged on the floor to hear about his food delivery system. His caption read, "POV. A princess treats you like your work matters." Princess Catherine spent her whole day just listening to ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She's not like other royals. The video went viral within hours. Sarah, the social worker, wrote a lengthy LinkedIn post about the networking that had happened naturally during the reception. Professional development doesn't always happen in conference rooms. Today, Princess Catherine created a space where 42 people working in community service could connect, share resources, and learn from each other. The informal atmosphere she encouraged led to real collaborations that will benefit hundreds of families. Leadership is about creating connections, not maintaining hierarchies. By evening, the hashtag #PrincessCatherineWindsor was trending across multiple platforms. But unlike many viral royal moments, this wasn't about fashion or protocol. It was about authenticity, connection, and the power of treating people as equals regardless of their backgrounds. Traditional media outlets began picking up the story, but they struggled to fit it into their usual royal coverage framework. This wasn't a charity visit where Catherine made polite small talk and moved on. This wasn't a formal ceremony with ribbon cutting and brief speeches. This was something entirely new. The BBC's royal correspondent, Victoria Hartley, was among the first to recognise the significance of what was happening. She had covered the royal family for 15 years and had never seen anything quite like the response to Catherine's Windsor reception. "What we're seeing," she explained in her evening news segment, "is not just positive coverage of a royal event. We're seeing ordinary people feeling genuinely connected to a member of the royal family in a way that transcends traditional deference or ceremony. Princess Catherine appears to have found a way to make the monarchy feel accessible without diminishing its dignity." Meanwhile, at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine was finally seeing the extent of the response to her day. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through post after post from the guests she had met, reading comments from their friends and family members, watching James's TikTok video for the third time. William came home from his own engagements to find her wiping away tears. "Darling, what's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," Catherine said, showing him the screen. "Everything's right." "Look at this." William read over her shoulder as she scrolled through the posts. His expression changed from concern to amazement to something approaching awe. "Catherine, do you realize what you've done? I drove myself to Windsor and had lunch with some lovely people." "No," William said, sitting down beside her. "You've reminded people why the monarchy matters. Look at these comments. People aren't just praising you. They're talking about getting involved in their own communities. They're inspired." Catherine clicked on one comment thread under Jennifer's Facebook post. A woman named Lisa had written, "If Princess Catherine can drive herself to Windsor and sit on the floor to hear people's stories, I can volunteer at the local food bank. Thanks for the reminder that we all have something to contribute." Another comment read, "My daughter saw James's TikTok and asked me what she could do to help in our neighborhood. We're starting with checking on elderly neighbors. Small steps." "My God," Catherine whispered, "it's spreading." Over the next few hours, more stories emerged. Local news outlets began reaching out to the guests from the reception, wanting to feature their community work. Volunteer organizations reported increased inquiries about getting involved. Small acts of kindness inspired by the day's events began appearing on social media feeds across the country. Dorothy's story particularly captured public imagination. Interview requests poured in, but the 92-year-old was selective, choosing to speak only to programs that focused on literacy and education. When she did appear on morning television, her message was simple. If an old teacher can inspire children to read, imagine what you could do in your own community. Marcus found himself invited to speak at youth centres across London about his mentoring work. The exposure led to offers of funding and volunteer support that he had been seeking for months. Frank, the retired builder, was contacted by schools throughout the region asking for help with their playground projects. He started an informal network of retired tradespeople willing to donate their time and skills to educational facilities. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The group of guests who had spoken about creating a network to share resources and support each other's work decided to make it official. They called it the Windsor Community Connection, and within a week of the reception, they had created a website, established communication channels, and begun coordinating their efforts. Catherine watched this unfold with a mixture of pride and humility. She had simply tried to create an authentic connection with good people doing important work. She had never imagined that her approach would inspire others to examine their own opportunities for community involvement. 3 days after the reception, she received an email that made her cry. It was from Dorothy's grandson, writing on behalf of his grandmother. "Dear Your Royal Highness, Grandmother wanted you to know that her phone hasn't stopped ringing since our day at Windsor. But more importantly, she's had 3 new children join her front garden reading sessions, all because their parents saw her interview and decided their children needed what she was offering. She says you've given her work a bigger platform than she ever dreamed possible, and she's not sure her 92-year-old heart can handle much more joy. Thank you for treating us all like family. Thank you for showing the world that helping others isn't about grand gestures, it's about showing up and caring. Grandmother says to tell you that you're welcome in her front garden classroom anytime." Catherine closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her kitchen, processing what had happened. She had made a simple decision to drive herself to an engagement and treat her guests as equals rather than subjects. That decision had somehow sparked a movement of people inspired to get more involved in their own communities. Her phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Ma'am, we're getting dozens of requests for similar events. Community groups wanting to meet with you. Local heroes asking to be considered for future receptions. How would you like to respond?" Catherine stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Let's think bigger than receptions, Hannah. I think we might be onto something important here." As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine realized that her spontaneous drive to Windsor had started something she couldn't have planned. The question now was what to do with this momentum, and how to use it to create lasting change rather than just a moment of feel-good publicity. She had no way of knowing that the biggest surprises were still to come. 2 weeks after the Windsor Castle reception, Catherine stood in her home office at Adelaide Cottage, surrounded by printed emails, handwritten letters, and newspaper clippings. The response to what the media had dubbed the People's Reception had far exceeded anything she or the Palace Communications team had anticipated. The letters came from across the United Kingdom and beyond. Teachers writing to say they had been inspired to start after-school programs. Retired professionals offering their skills to local charities, young people organizing neighborhood cleanup projects, community groups requesting guidance on how to expand their reach. But it was a particular letter, handwritten on simple blue paper, that had prompted Catherine to call an urgent meeting with senior palace advisors. "Dear Princess Catherine," the letter began, "my name is Emily Watson, and I'm 8 years old. I live in Manchester with my mum and dad. I saw the pictures of you sitting on the floor talking to people who help other people, and I asked my mum why you looked so happy. She said it was because you were doing your job the way it was meant to be done. I don't understand all the grown-up words, but I think you're the first princess I've seen who looks like she's having fun helping people. Can other princesses and princes do their jobs the same way you do yours? My teacher says that's called setting an example. I hope you keep setting good examples because it makes me think being a grown-up might not be so boring after all." Catherine had read Emily's letter 5 times before she fully grasped its implications. Children were watching. They were drawing conclusions about leadership, service, and what it meant to be an adult based on what they observed. Her spontaneous decision to drive herself to Windsor and connect authentically with her guests hadn't just influenced the adults who were there, it was shaping how the next generation viewed public service. The meeting she had called included William, her private secretary Hannah, the palace communications director David, and somewhat unusually, Margaret Thornbury from Windsor Castle, who had become an unexpected advocate for Catherine's new approach to royal engagements.
The numbers speak for themselves, David was saying, consulting his tablet.
Social media engagement is up 400% compared to typical royal event coverage. More importantly, the tone is different. People aren't just commenting on fashion or protocol. They're talking about community involvement, volunteering, civic responsibility. Hannah nodded. "We've received over 3,000 direct inquiries about how people can get involved in community work in their areas. The Duchess of Cornwall's literacy charity has reported a 30% increase in volunteer applications. Local councils across the country are saying they've seen unprecedented interest in community meetings and volunteer opportunities. But," David continued, "we're also facing some challenges. Traditional royal reporters are struggling with how to cover these events. The informal atmosphere doesn't fit their usual framework. Some are suggesting that too much accessibility could diminish the dignity of the institution." Catherine looked around the table. "What do you all think? Is there truth to that concern?" Margaret spoke up first. "If I may, Your Royal Highness, I've worked at Windsor for 37 years. I've seen formal receptions that were perfectly executed and completely forgettable. What happened 2 weeks ago will be remembered for decades, not because protocol was abandoned, but because genuine connections were made." "That seems like dignity to me," William leaned forward. "Catherine, what's your instinct here? You started something, but where do you want it to go?" Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where their children were playing with their dog. The normality of the scene grounded her as she tried to articulate thoughts that had been forming since the day at Windsor. "I keep thinking about Emily Watson's letter," she said finally. "She's 8 years old, and she noticed that I looked happy doing my job. That suggests that maybe I haven't always looked happy doing it, or that she's seen other royals who don't look happy in their work." She turned back to the group. "What if happiness, authenticity, genuine connection? What if these aren't just nice additions to royal duty? What if they're essential to making the monarchy relevant in the modern world?" "Go on," William encouraged. "Think about it. We're living in an age where people have access to more information, more choices, more ways to make their voices heard than ever before. They don't need us to be distant and formal. They need us to be authentic and useful. They need to see that our privileged position serves a real purpose in their daily lives." Hannah made notes as Catherine spoke. "So you're suggesting a fundamental shift in how royal engagements are structured? I'm suggesting we stop treating the public like subjects who should be grateful for a brief royal appearance and start treating them like partners in building stronger communities," Catherine replied. "The people I met at Windsor weren't honored just to meet me. They were honored to have their work recognized and supported." "There's a difference." David looked thoughtful. "The logistical challenges would be significant. Security protocols, staff preparation, venue arrangements. Informal doesn't mean unplanned." "Of course," Catherine agreed, "but I think Margaret proved that good staff can adapt to almost anything if they understand the purpose behind the change." Margaret smiled. "I'd be happy to work with any venue to help them prepare for more interactive events. The key is understanding that we're creating space for genuine conversation, not just orchestrated encounters." William had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Catherine, I think you're onto something important, but I also think you need to be prepared for resistance. Some people, both within the institution and outside it, will see this approach as too radical. What kind of resistance? Questions about security, concerns about maintaining appropriate boundaries, worry that too much accessibility could lead to difficult situations, William explained. And honestly, some people simply prefer their royals to be more formal and distant. They find comfort in traditional protocol. Catherine nodded. I understand those concerns. But William, look at what happened after Windsor. People weren't demanding more access to me personally. They were inspired to get more involved in their own communities. If our role is to serve the public good, isn't that exactly what we should be encouraging? Hannah looked up from her notes. Ma'am, we've actually had several interesting requests that might help test these ideas. A community centre in Birmingham has asked if you'd be willing to participate in their volunteer appreciation event, but specifically requested that it be informal, like Windsor. A group of teachers in Scotland want to invite you to see their innovative literacy program, but they want time for real conversation about education policy. And we've had inquiries from several youth organisations about events where young people can discuss community issues with you directly. Those all sound wonderful, Catherine said immediately. David raised his hands slightly. Before we commit to anything, shouldn't we establish some guidelines, parameters for how these informal events would work? Security requirements, time limits, media access? Absolutely, Catherine agreed. But the guidelines should support the purpose, not constrain it. If we're trying to create authentic connections, the rules should help that happen, not prevent it. Margaret leaned forward. If I may suggest, perhaps we could start with a pilot program. A few carefully chosen events where we can test different approaches, learn what works, refine the process, build a model that other venues could adapt. I love that idea, Catherine said. What if we planned 3 different types of events over the next 2 months? Different communities, different formats, different challenges. See what we learn. And document everything, Hannah added. If this approach proves successful, other members of the royal family might want to adopt similar methods. William grinned. Are you suggesting we could revolutionize royal engagements across the board? I'm suggesting we could make them more meaningful, Catherine replied, for everyone involved. Over the next hour, they outlined a plan for what they privately called the new approach. 3 pilot events would be scheduled. A community centre visit in Birmingham where Catherine would participate in activities alongside volunteers rather than simply observing them. A school visit in Scotland where she would join a discussion panel with teachers about education challenges. And a youth summit in Wales where young people would lead presentations about community projects they had initiated. Each event would prioritise conversation over ceremony, collaboration over observation, authentic connection over formal protocol. Traditional elements like receiving lines and brief courtesy visits would be replaced with roundtable discussions, collaborative activities, and extended conversations. One more thing, Catherine said as the meeting was wrapping up. I want to make sure we're not just creating feel-good moments. These events should result in tangible outcomes. Resources shared, connections made, problems solved. If people are generous enough to share their stories and experiences with me, I want to ensure that generosity leads to real support for their work. David made a final note. So success won't just be measured by positive media coverage, but by demonstrable impact on the communities and causes involved. Exactly. As the others left, William lingered behind with Catherine. You know, he said, when you decided to drive yourself to Windsor that morning, I thought you were just trying to feel more normal. I didn't realize you were redesigning the monarchy. Catherine laughed. I'm not redesigning anything that fundamental. I'm just trying to make our role more useful, more relevant, more genuinely helpful to people who are doing important work. Do you think it will catch on, this approach? Catherine thought about Emily Watson's letter, about the community connections that had formed since Windsor, about the volunteers who had reached out to local organizations.
After being inspired by Dorothy and Marcus and James.
I think people are hungry for authenticity, she said finally. They want to believe that their leaders, including their royals, genuinely care about the work they're doing. If we can consistently demonstrate that care through our actions, not just our words, then yes, I think it will catch on. 2 months later, the pilot programs had exceeded all expectations. The Birmingham Community Centre visit had resulted in 3 new volunteer programs being established. The Scottish school discussion had led to policy recommendations being forwarded to the Department of Education. The Welsh Youth Summit had generated a network of young community leaders who continued to collaborate on projects across the country. More importantly, each event had inspired dozens of similar initiatives in other communities. The approach that had begun with Catherine's spontaneous drive to Windsor was spreading organically, creating ripple effects of community engagement and authentic leadership throughout the United Kingdom. Emily Watson's mother sent a follow-up letter 6 months later. Dear Princess Catherine, Emily wanted you to know that she started a reading club for younger children at her school, inspired by the lady with the front garden classroom she heard about. When I asked her why she wanted to help other children learn to read, she said it was because she saw you sitting on the floor listening to people, and she wanted to be the kind of grown-up who sits on the floor and listens too. Thank you for showing her what good leadership looks like. Catherine kept that letter on her desk, a daily reminder that the most powerful change often begins with the simplest decision: to treat others as equals, to listen more than you speak, and to remember that titles and positions are only valuable if they're used to lift others up. The drive to Windsor had taken 20 minutes. The transformation it sparked was still unfolding, touching communities and inspiring connections that neither Catherine nor anyone else could have imagined. When she first picked up her car keys that autumn morning and decided to do things differently. In the end, it wasn't about abandoning tradition or protocol. It was about remembering that the best traditions are the ones that bring out the best in people. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply be genuine, present, and willing to learn from everyone you meet.